Otra vez.
Otra
Por
vez.
favor.
Por favor, sí.
All right.
Ready? Let's go.
When the music starts to play, she slides down on the floor, dancing without partner, swaying on the to and fro. There's a rhythm in her footsteps and a flower in her hand. Smile on her face.
Hey man, if you're not busy for the next hour, we're doing a radio show vlog that we do every Friday, and we'd love to have you join us. I sent you the information in your email, so you can click on the Zoom link and join us. Love to have you. Thanks.
She just wants to dance.
Fighting room.
Gone and let the girls dance. Oh yeah. She just wants to dance. Where she's moving, kind of lazy, and it's obvious to me. You know this
Somebody hear me? Anybody hear me?
girl ain't crazy.
Yeah.
Okay.
She's as wild.
Yeah, I hear you loud and clear, John. Good morning, everybody.
Oh, okay.
In
got,
her fingers.
I just invited Manny Pen.
Oh, good.
I don't know what his schedule is. He's running for office, so no telling what he'd be doing right now.
Yeah, let me hear. It's there we go. Since we're on the air.
Hey, one of our local heroes testified in the hearing yesterday.
Which hearing?
Crystal Good. We should get her on the show.
What hearing is this?
The SCOTUS hearing.
You mean in
Supreme Court.
Oh, Supreme Court. Oh, really?
Yeah.
You
Yeah.
know this- who is this? So who is she?
I've known her for years. She's a single mom. She's African American. Beautiful woman. Very talented songwriter, singer,
Oh,
performer. She's friends with my daughter,
oh,
which is really cool.
Is she? But your daughter's in New York, right?
Right. Yeah, but they're all involved with the women's health issues.
Oh, I see. Gotcha. Oh, so she testified at the congressional hearing. Wow.
Well, via Zoom, it was just like this,
Yeah. Okay.
but it was a very compelling statement that she gave, and I want to share it with you guys somehow. I've got it on my phone in a text, but I'm sure I can send it to you guys. Yeah, I can. I'll send it to you right now.
Yeah, do that. We got our guest, Lou, Professor, Dr. Professor, Professor Herr Doctor,
Lou.
Herr Doctor Professor. Lou, is it Louis or Lewis?
Lou.
Lou Martin on from Chatham University. I think Ted Bettner has led us to him this morning, and we're not getting started just yet. We got about 5 more minutes, Lou. So we have my co-host here, JB Christensen. We've been on doing this radio thing with Labor Beat Radio and a bunch of other stuff for, I don't know, a decade or more now. Maybe more than that.
I think it's been longer than that, John.
Anyway.
I think it has been.
Yeah. We got thrown off of one radio station, but yeah, but anyway, we're well, actually two, and but we're doing our own thing here, and so
Yep,
welcome.
two.
I'm glad you could join us. I hope Ted comes in and can give you a proper introduction, but and we thank you for joining us this morning.
Glad to be here.
Chatham's in Pittsburgh, right?
Yep.
Yeah, we are live on Facebook, by the way, right now. Just so everybody keeps their manners, you know, in good shape here.
And I'm not acting as a spokesperson for Chatham today.
Oh,
My opinions
we're
are
not
my
acting
own.
for, yeah, right. We only have one sponsor. I think it's the Online University of the Left. Oh no, two, and Mountain View Solar, and we're not going to speak for them entirely either. So yeah. JB's a very strong solar advocate. Yeah,
They're coming to
And
my house on Monday.
actually does installations.
Who is the solar company?
Mountain
Yeah.
View Solar.
You're kidding. Wow, what a small world.
Yeah.
That is super cool.
Yeah. Danny Chiotis is an old friend, an old comrade, I guess I should
Yeah,
say.
I pronounce his name Chiotis.
Chiotis, thank you.
Yeah, just real fast. Chiotis.
Okay.
Yeah, that way you don't have to think about it. But he's my partner. Him and I work on a bunch of stuff together.
Anyway, we also have James Boyd on the line here in his vehicle again. He's in New Jersey at the moment, but he's on one of these slingshots. You know, he came out. West
Who are you
Virginia.
driving today, James?
Anyway, he's been very active in the addiction.
Oh, he's muted. He's muted. He can't talk. He can't talk.
Recovery.
Oh,
community.
okay. There you go. No, I'm not muted. There we go. You know, I got to.
And,
Who are you driving
morning,
today?
You say who?
Yeah, who?
Is this-
Miss Daisy.
Driving Miss Daisy. All right.
Miss Daisy.
That's cool.
No, I just left the VA hospital. Had to go early for a dental appointment, but I couldn't. I had to make sure they got me out of there in time so I can at least get online in my car and tune in and listen, because I know we got some important stuff going on.
Hey,
So I'm going to just mute myself and listen.
Okay.
So happy you could join us, sir, from Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I sent you that YouTube of Crystal Good.
Okay, wonderful.
And
Thanks.
John's
I'm going to
got
go
it too.
mute now.
Okay.
All right, bye-bye.
Okay.
Nice to meet you, sir.
Anyway, so you're in Pittsburgh, and what's the actually until I had not heard of it, but I've been out of school a long time. So tell me a little bit about Chatham.
It was a women's college from 1869 up until 5 years ago. And then we went gender inclusive, and about 1,500 undergrads and about the same number of grad students. It was, for most of its history, a small liberal arts college.
Right. Is it what does it have graduate programs in?
Physicians, a lot of health care stuff,
Okay.
physician's assistant, physical therapy, occupational therapy, as well as creative writing. We've got a great creative writing program. So it's just a range.
Have you written your first novel yet?
I haven't written a novel. I did write my first book, which is about just a history, really, of my home county, Hancock County, West Virginia.
I want to welcome Patience, our good friend Patience Waite, on the phone.
Good morning, Lou.
Anyway,
Hi, Patience.
I've been listening. You sound a lot, Chatham sounds a lot like my alma mater. I went to Hollins.
Where's
Oh.
that at?
Down in Roanoke,
right.
Okay.
you know, it has a very good creative writing program. But in line with today's culture, it is known as the place that Joe Biden went to beat his stutter.
No
It
kidding.
has had a stuttering program, oh, heck, maybe since like the 60s. A
Wow.
long time.
Hmm.
Huh.
Well, along those lines, Chatham's known as Rachel Carson's alma mater.
Oh, bravo.
Wow, that's really significant.
See, wonderful
Not that
wonderful
you're
things
not-
happen
Not
in
that you're not Patience, but
Hey, JB,
sir.
If I make you co-host, can you help me watch the participants thing here?
Absolutely, since we're missing somebody.
Yeah, Mike's calling out this morning here.
Is he under the weather?
He's under the weather and he has to go get his flu shot.
Oh, okay, yeah, that's important.
And we'll
hope
welcome
he's
our
getting
good
the
friends,
booster.
Carl Davidson,
Morning.
who I've known of
Hey,
forever,
look, he's coming in.
and my good friend and longtime comrade there, Scott Marshall.
Oh, and John Aldis is going to join us, and Scott. Right.
Randy had to go to the dentist.
I know. He told me, he sent me a thing. I have to go to see a dentist in about a
Thought you
month. And
weren't.
I'm just
not going
I
until
just,
later.
okay, I just told you.
Like the dentist wasn't scary enough already, right?
Right.
Yes, please.
Okay, we're at 9:02. Okay, welcome, Dr. Aldis. Thank you for joining.
Hello.
I thought you posted the best chart that I think I've seen. I mean, both from I've been studying data science, through my second half of my career, and I want to tell you, it was just beautiful. The impact, the political economy of COVID over a 3-month period. It's unbelievable. Anyway, so well, I think we got enough to get started here. And the theme today really is the one that I think I've wanted to pursue more depth from the beginning of starting this show. And that is the understanding better the working class of West Virginia and Appalachia in general. And to use that understanding to try and understand, for example, why in the current situation it's very, very likely that Trump will win. Here's Ted's getting ready to join. And that you can see this even a little bit within the range of endorsements of the West Virginia AFL-CIO here in the state, where they typically never actually, it's the Nationals' job to weigh in on the presidency and stuff like that. So most councils don't touch that. But they do, when they feel so moved, ring in endorsements on the congressional and Senate races of their state candidates, okay? As well as county and others. And in West Virginia, endorsements at that level are notably missing this year. So it's an agnostic position on the Congress, the Senate, and of course the presidency, but that's the usual case. In West Virginia, the median income is $16.50, median hourly income. Hourly, important distinction here, depending on what you're talking about. And the African American income is 40% less than that. Women make about 30% less than that. The median, which is for those who are not that familiar, if you have 100 people ranked in order of income, then the median is 50. Whoever's ranked in the 50th spot. So you're looking at the middle of the hourly wage, which you're talking. So you're talking about that's pretty much where the working class, probably a little bit above the 50% level, but because there are some hourly incomes that are very high and they're not quite proletarian at any dimension, but nonetheless, okay, you're looking at a pretty close that the median wage in West Virginia is $1.50 above what the minimum should be. If you're talking about African American or women workers, you're looking at, of course, African Americans in West Virginia are only 3.5% or some percent of the population here. But nonetheless, you're still looking at, looking at women who are certainly 50% of the population. They're making 30% less than that meat in it. So that's it gives you one little slice of the picture. And not only that, you have a situation where the share of wealth in West Virginia paid to labor over time has not only been has fallen behind other parts of the country at a sort of stayed flatter in a way, and the other parts of the country have risen a little bit over the last 40 years, but West Virginia has gone pretty much nowhere. So the poverty, and added to that the fact that in the ranking of educational systems, which people can argue a little bit about how those rankings are compiled, but nonetheless, you have Wikipedia publishes a composite set of rankings, and West Virginia is rated 50th of the United States, in the states of the United States, and it's just above the Virgin Islands and American Samoa.
I have a nice diagram of the West Virginia working class if you want me to show it.
Oh, if you got a post, that would be great. But let me just spend another minute here. And then, so the question today, I want to sort of put in front of everybody. Also, I want to add two other points that just in today's news, a beautiful graph has been, Times has posted this morning, of what's happened to average checking accounts in the past month since the drop off of the stimulus checks. Okay, they were going directly to families, and it's just unbelievable. The drop. I think they surveyed 80,000 different accounts, and the drop was dramatic. And in addition to that, the report on poverty this morning, also in the Times, shows that all the trends that are accelerating poverty, all the trends that since the pandemic have been accelerating poverty, and the reality is before us. So I'll open a discussion like that, and with it'd be great, Carl, if you have you want to
Sure.
You can share the.
You have to let me share the screen.
I have to do. I'll just make you another co-host, and then you can do as you wish with that. How's that? Okay.
Good morning, John.
Hi, Mike. I'm glad you're with us this morning.
Yeah, I rescheduled. I'm gonna get my flu shot at noon, or a little after noon. So I think I'll be able to hang in there for a little while. So.
All right. Cool.
And good morning, everyone on the panel.
Carl, can you share?
That's what I'm trying to do.
Oh,
there it is. Let's see. To make this bigger, let's see. Slideshow from current slide. There we go. This is a graph I found. I was doing a study of the Rust Belt and as to what its current makeup was. And so I found, only thing I could find was the thing for West Virginia, which I took as typical. And the interesting thing you'll find here is that the usual things that we're known for, mining, quarrying, this is just this gray sliver here, manufacturing is quite small. But what you see is a big growth in health and government, which means these two things, which are ed-med, health and education. Government mainly means teachers. And then you have retail trade, transportation. West Virginia truck drivers, it's a relatively small. So, and here's your high-tech information sector. So, and then these are a mixture of everything else. So, what you find is that young people migrate to the larger cities or leave entirely. The power of unions declined somewhat, even with the militancy of the teachers, and a lot of the work is precarious. So that's a
I think your graph shows the most important thing, the government and the health and social assistance is really a product of the Byrd years.
Yes.
In West Virginia in a large respect, because a lot more, understanding the ratio of public to private in West Virginia is important, because we have about a third more revenue coming in from the federal government than we pay out in taxes. So that's another, sort of political economy effect, and a product of Senator Byrd being the chair of the Appropriations Committee for a long time. Plus he was the first real leader in West Virginia to strive to get a political base independent of the coal industry, at least partially independent of it. And he used federal largesse in many respects, to leverage, not being just a wholly owned property of the natural resource industry. Anyway, I'd like to ask Professor Lou Martin to introduce him here. He's I'm going to have Ted introduce him, actually. Welcome, Ted Bettner, to the program. And why don't you tell us, why don't you introduce Professor Martin properly, okay? Because I have not done so yet. Thank you.
Well, first of all, Lou's a great guy. No, Lou, we've worked together. Lou is on the board of the West Virginia Mine Museum down in Maywan, and he's a professor of history, concentrating in labor history, and he's done some remarkable work on industrialization in West Virginia that I think has a lot of prescience for what's happening today and the transition that we're trying to make to a clean energy economy and where we're going now. But it'd probably be a little bit better for Lou to talk about that a little bit. I've just been very impressed with his scholarly work, his activist work in the community, and his, ability to really fight for working class people.
You still hear me?
Yes, Lou. I can hear you.
Okay. Every so often, this headset tries to censor me, so let me know if I cut out at some point. But so I'm a professor of history at Chatham University, and I went to WVU. I grew up in Hancock County, West Virginia, and I did my dissertation on Hancock County. And a lot of it is about the culture and politics of the working class there, steel and pottery workers. I interviewed a lot of retirees for my dissertation, and that became my book, Smokestacks in the Hills, Rural Industrial Workers in West Virginia. And in 2011, I participated in this march on Blair Mountain, and met a lot of people that we joined together to start the West Virginia Mine Wars Museum in Maywan, and that's been a big part of my work ever since it opened in 2015. It's closed right now because of the pandemic, unfortunately, because we have a new partnership with United Mine Workers, Local 1440 in Maywan, and we now have the museum in a building that they own, and it was entirely redone over the last several months, but we can't actually show it to anybody because of COVID. But so that's a little bit about my work, and as well as the museum is I'm a volunteer board member, but it's a passion of mine.
See, one of the first questions I wanted to ask you was based on your experience in interviews. Okay, did you come away with a sense of what the future of those communities, could look like? Given the fact that, the sort of long-standing and the long arch of history of both the steel industry and mining in the United States. How do you see balancing the culture of the past and the ability of the people to envision something different or something new or something additional that they need? How do you view that, or how's your what's the karma there?
There's a lot of ways I could answer that question, and the first thing that comes to my mind is the conclusion of my book, which is so the beginning of it starts with the creation of a rural industrial place. These industrialists moved to Hancock County to get away from unions and to get out of Pittsburgh. And there were articles in Iron Age, the industry publication, that was saying, country boys make good loyal workers. And then Weird and Steel did a lot to encourage employee loyalty over the decades, and they were pretty successful in a lot of ways. There was a lot of strife in the 30s and 40s, but by the 1950s, I would say there was a pretty fair election in which the majority chose the Independent Steelworkers Union, which eventually would become part of the United Steelworkers in the last 15 years or so. But so the end of the book, though, is all of these people who developed quite a bit of company loyalty and credited the employers with making life better. All of those jobs went away. The number of the jobs that are still left are in the hundreds. So I think something on the order of 500 left at what used to be Weird and Steel, and about the same number at Homer Laughlin, China. And the end of the book, I talk about how essentially these were jobs that were created through capital mobility, and they were jobs lost because of capital mobility. And the capital seeks out new places with new country boys, or new rural people, or new labor markets to tap into, places where they can start over, where they can create the new plant that with the new technology, with the new workers, and not the old expectations. And a lot of this is happening really in China today. And so in the book saying they're incorporating a new generation of rural people into a factory setting in China. And what does this portend for the working class in America? A group of people that tend to put a lot of value into community and place are now faced with a situation where capital will be forever on the move, and in order to survive, people are going to have to be chasing where's the latest growth area, to a large extent. Now, that's not true of all industry. It's certainly true of manufacturing, though. And so I think that one of the things about the beginning of my study was noticing how adaptable people could be when they had to be. And then I believe that you often hear, for instance, coal miners will say, all I know is mining coal. But the reality is I've also interviewed a lot of former coal miners who have adapted, whether it's getting a new trade or going to college and so on. I think working class people have proven to be very adaptive when they need to be. And unfortunately, I don't think that means necessarily reinventing their community or staying in West Virginia. It probably means going someplace where there's more recent growth, unfortunately, unless some basic things about the way our economy start to change.
Other people, patience.
Well, it's interesting because you talk about the flight of capital, which brings us back to the fundamental tension in society between labor and capital. Those are the two sides. And the reason that the post-World War II era was so prosperous for everyone basically was because there was a different kind of agreement struck, at least for a little while, balancing labor interests against capital interests. Now, my dad worked for a big corporation, and he wound up becoming their lobbyist in Washington. So I'm well familiar with the hatred in capital circles toward labor. They want what they want when they want it. Here in West Virginia, we have the added burden of always having been seen as an extractive state. Is there anything that we can do when you talk about people having to move, it's because there isn't anything left to extract. So how do we shift the West Virginia economy away from that mindset, that it's about what you can take out of the ground, or it's what you can cut down, or what you can burn, or whatever, and turn it into something that's more self-sustaining?
Well, I think that I would go partly back to Carl's slide earlier. One of the things that I've tried to argue it in an op-ed that I sent to the Charleston Gazette some years ago that they never published.
Funny how that works.
and I'm going to give it another shot with a different newspaper this year. But what I've said is that rather than focus on bringing new jobs to West Virginia, we should really be thinking about how do we make the jobs that we have better, because steel and coal jobs weren't inherently good jobs. There wasn't anything, it was never written that industrial work is good work or good paying or has benefits. That was never written anywhere. And if you look at the early 20th century, you see that these coal camps and steel towns were centers of poverty and dangerous work, a lot of people getting injured and killed on the job. That what made those good jobs was a robust labor movement with strong labor laws. And I believe that the teachers strike, for instance, has the potential, if teachers were able to have a real union and real collective bargaining, those could be jobs that there's no reason that we should be given $60-70 million to coal companies that are going bankrupt, when that could be invested in the education system, in teacher pay. And being a teacher, it should be a job that there's competition for, or that attracts, a lot of young people because they're good jobs. That shouldn't be a job that you have to give up good pay and benefits because you're dedicated to it. And so I think that the focus really should be on why are these low paying jobs, or why are these jobs that are precarious in some way? And can we focus on the jobs that we actually have? I think that we're at about 550,000 jobs in West Virginia. I think it used to be closer to 750,000 or something like that. There, no doubt, jobs have gone away. Jobs in manufacturing and mining have gone away. And I think people have gone away too. But I still think that if teachers, nurses, home health care workers, all of these folks were making a living wage, we would see the rising tide, if you will, of I wouldn't go so far as to say prosperity, but a lot of places in West Virginia would be a lot better off.
Viability.
I got a question about that. So the biggest argument that I hear against raising the minimum wage to $15 an hour is from small business people primarily. Well, other than the corporations who will always have to be compelled into this kind of thing. But it is the question of whether a $15 minimum wage would or would not put small business out of business, whether it's true or not. And I know the economics debate on this leans toward it not being a job killer, but it's not 100% conclusive. And it depends on the area and the demographics a lot, and the kind of industry that's around. So nonetheless, winning legislation like let's set the minimum wage at $15 an hour requires a pretty broad coalition legislatively to achieve. And so how do you respond to the small business owner that says, oh, gee, if I had to spend $15 an hour for help right now in my restaurant, I would be out and pay let the tips be above the $15 an hour, right? I'd go out of business. Now, some of them are lying, some of them aren't. What's your response to that concern, because it's powerful. It's more powerful politically than just its numbers.
Yeah, I think that I'm not saying that minimum wage should be set at $15 an hour. I think that it should try to keep up with inflation over time. I think, and probably if we look back at the last time that it was adjusted or raised, we, you know, if we accounted for all those years, maybe it would be 15. I'm not sure, but what I'm saying is, what I would like to see is the unions organize healthcare workers in. I would like to see the teachers have a real union. I would like to see unions being a strong advocate for the workers. And I would say that, for instance, there was a time when Walmart was the largest employer in the state. I think that's not been the case for about 5 or 6 years or something. But Walmart's one of the most profitable companies in the world. Most of that wealth goes to one family. I would love to see retail workers in unions that were able to demand $15 an hour, benefits, full-time schedules, these sorts of things. I think if you look at so WVU Medicine is now the largest employer. I think a lot of our healthcare workers work for them. You look at hotel chains, fast food restaurants. These are all some of the biggest corporations in the country with the biggest profits. And so what I'm saying is a robust labor movement could extract higher wages out of these huge corporations. And I don't think that they would miss a beat. And so I'm not saying that we should get there through legislative action. I'm saying that we should get there through workers organizing with the support of laws, I think.
There's a simple answer: raise your prices. When a small businessman says, "Well, if I had to pay $15 an hour, I will go out of business." No, you don't. Just raise your prices.
You also get better employees that are more productive and that come to that can support their family. There's more money circulating in the local economy. So
less turnover.
Yeah, I always think the small business thing's a false flag in some ways. I mean, I think it's a shock to the system. Say, wow, I got to pay my employees that much, but it's really about just reconfiguring the way you do business. And as Carl said, paying a couple extra cents for a hamburger is not going to, kill anybody. And most of the studies have shown, if you actually look at what they've shown that it will reduce working hours, not jobs per se. When you actually get into the detail, it shows that, making more money and working a little less is actually a good thing. That means you have more time with your family, more time to do other things. So if that's the cost, is that people are gonna work a little less and make more money. To me, it's a good, it's definitely worth the cost.
Yeah, patience.
Well, it's also, just as the current generation doesn't understand the bugaboo about communism and the Red Scare, they don't understand about, and I agree with them, they don't understand about inflation. So, that drumbeat that always comes up out of the business community about how, we're going to have runaway inflation. I don't think that will have the same kind of resonance, particularly when the Fed has made it clear that it intends to hold interest rates close to zero for the foreseeable future. If we actually had some visionaries someplace in this government, they would see that now is actually the perfect time to try to restructure the West Virginia economy. We've got cheap money. We've got a ton of people who are looking around for what can they do. The resistance to change, I think, is low because people, for once, instead of West Virginians being beaten down by living in West Virginia, everybody's beaten down and they see it and they know it. So I think that they are more open to the idea that something has to give.
I think that in order to politically achieve a $15 an hour minimum wage, yeah, I think that to work legislation that strengthens unions would be a really important leg of that strategy. I also think that it would be useful to talk about starting with the big corporations and phasing in small business. Because I think that when it comes to winning politically, isolating our enemies is really important, which means separating the small business people who are in the Chamber of Commerce constantly getting the propaganda from the corporations, to separate them from the corporations and bring them back into the community. And also a part of that is not only be having a phase in of a $15 an hour minimum wage, it would also be holding out Medicare for all to them. I've been surprised at how a couple different times small business people were in favor of Medicare for all when I thought they wouldn't, because in other ways they leaned right. We used to have our meetings at a chicken shack. We had a lot of our progressive organizations met at this place because they had a big room. And so we were meeting, our single payer healthcare group was meeting there, and one of our people who's like very chatty, like started chatting up the owner, and we were all surprised that he was so in favor of Medicare for all, because he personally had a health issue and he personally had problems getting his insurance for himself. And he felt guilty that he didn't have insurance for his employees. So, you know, there are ways, I think it's not just an issue, it's not just an economic issue, but there's also like political issues of like, how do we win? How do we politically work the issue?
Scott.
Yeah, I just wanted to say something real quick. This whole discussion reminds me of sometime in the 60s, there was a pretty big movement for a 6-hour day with no cut and pay kind of idea. And I think that idea has merit again, too. I think that belongs in the mix. And I also just, on Mate One, that movie is one of my favorite movies of all time. And I love the scene in there where you have all the different camps shut out of the mines sitting there, and one starts playing the banjo, and pretty soon all the groups of black, brown, and white get into the song and start singing. It's a wonderful, anyway, that's it.
Let me ask, go a little farther with this. You know, when I was in the labor movement, a lot of times, you know, contracts would come up, and you know, the choices were between, you know, bad and worse, at least those that were put on the table in front of you. And it was difficult to develop you know, a philosophy, a philosophically satisfying strategy, because sometimes you were faced with, you were representing a relatively small fraction of the corporation's employees. I mean, because they were geographically spread out over the world. And you had an important part of their industry, but it wasn't, you know, it wasn't going to dominate the CEO's thinking every day. And we were being exploited to basically give the company some extra money in order to stay in town a few extra months, kind of proposals. Okay. And, you know, we were sort of faced with the choice of striking early when we had declining strength, or striking later when we had none. And I recall thinking at the time that, you know, the real problem here is that this industry is leaving town, and they all did eventually. Okay. We needed a plan from day one to say, you know, what happens to the people that leave here? You are going to move, and we're going to have to, as Professor Martin said, we're going to have to chase some other set of jobs, okay? Because as capital moves around the world, so do people. I mean, labor follows capital, and actually there's a flip-flop thing that capital also follows labor, you know, and looks for labor, and if it's a new industry. So this business of why not? You're not going to be able to stay in the same community. You're not going to be able to stay in the same industry. Your career may change 5 times now during a lifetime. You need, you know, this mobile protection plan. You got to pay the losers in every downside. You know, you got to pay them enough to become winners. And I think that's the key to the you know, my currently moderately ideal labor movement configuration, which is in Denmark, and we're basically, you have an economy that's based on 75% trade, okay, as far as income. So jobs is a churn all the time, but you raise the labor movement to an institutional level where they're basically have a big responsibility for relocating and re-educating and retraining folks through various services, because they have a higher public standing. We here, once you leave the firm level in a corporation, I mean, you're dead. You know, why does every union local in the country oppose every trade agreement? Well, because you know, the business of you going to another job when trade reconfigures your economy is ridiculous. You're out of business. You're gone. It's existential. So I think restructuring is what's needed. I've ranted enough. Who wants to go next? Carl was in front of you, I think. Patience, go
ahead. I took part in the 90s in the plant closing movements for a couple of years. I was the editor of FIR News, the Federation for Industrial Retention and Renewal. And we waged a lot of battles, lost most of them, won a few. But in the end, what we came to was what I guess for shorthand, I would call the Mondragon strategy. In fact, I went over to Mondragon and studied there for a while. Here's the thing everybody has to keep in mind. When you say our jobs, you're just giving a demonstration of the hegemony of bourgeois rule, because they're not your jobs. The jobs belong to capital. And the only way they become your jobs is if you take the Mondragon model and you own the company. Then they're your jobs. So when you have a worker-owned company with one worker, one share, one vote, and the shares can't be sold to anybody outside the business, then you can say these are our jobs. And what you end up with is a network of cooperatives that can dominate an entire region and raise everybody's living standards. But it's a network of small to medium-sized businesses of all sorts. And it can be done. I mean, the Mondragon example has been thriving now for 50 years. And it's even got some spin-offs in the United States that are doing well. Smith's Engineering in Madison, Wisconsin is a worker-owned co-op of 50 workers, same as Mondragon. And the jobs that those 50 workers have are actually their jobs, that they own them. So I think that's the strategy, a long-term strategy for labor that also has the value of not only benefiting the workers, but it opens the door to socialism.
Carl, what do you think about public ownership of more production, like utilities?
That's fine too. In fact, I told our local mayor here that I asked him what his electric bill was for the city of Aliquippa, and he told me it was quite high. And I said, well, look, I said, we got a lot of rooftops in Aliquippa, set up some solar panels and some wind turbines, and have it half owned, municipally owned, and the other half owned by the workers who maintain it. And instead of spending money every month to pay your electric bill, you're actually you have a revenue stream coming in. And it doesn't take all that much to get it started. There's one that already exists in Cleveland, Ohio Cooperative Solar.
Patience.
Well, two things. First of all, on Carl's point, I'm trying to think, was it Nashville that tried to do that with high-speed internet and has just been, I mean, it's been great for the city. It's been great for the residents, and the tech companies have been fighting it tooth and nail. So when you talk about doing that, you have to encompass the scope of the battle you'll be taking on and the entrenched interests. You know, so, and JB would be familiar with this because you know how difficult the solar pitch is in terms of like state policy, because the utilities rise up and say, no, we don't want to do that. It's going to cut into our revenue stream. Second, and I don't want to go too far down this path, but we also have the culture of West Virginia. And the things that we talk about, I mean, we can talk about them all day long and they can make sense. But West Virginia has an inward-looking, reactive, fatalistic culture. You know, hillbilly elegy sort of mindset. And of all things, I wish that we had some kind of US student exchange program to take ordinary West Virginia high school students. And I do not mean, you know, the A-listers. I mean, the ones who want to stay in West Virginia and all they really want to do is live around their families and hang out with their friends and go down, you know, go down to the river and fish and things like that. And that's fine. But they need to see how life is lived elsewhere. There are people in West Virginia who have never been to Washington, D.C. There are probably even more people in West Virginia who have never been to a city of more than 100,000 people. And until they understand how different it can be, the youngsters coming up, all they can do is either flee or they just figure that God made West Virginia to get pissed on and I'm just going to have to gut it out.
Let me ask Dr. Aldis a question to weigh in here, and that is that, you know, public health everywhere in the world, you know, is directly related to your capacity to produce, work, do all kinds of, you know, things, support public interests. And we're in the COVID situation we're in right now. I mean, there clearly is no way out of it without, if you don't want to call it Medicare for all, there has to be a national health initiative at every public level to just get through COVID. Am I right about that? And I mean, how dramatic are the administrative changes in healthcare, in your view, that need to be made just to get through where we're at right now?
Actually, public health has been pretty clear persistently from the very first. Some things work, and it's called mitigation. It isn't called prevention. Okay, it's reducing the risk, and well-led countries have national recommendations, national mandates, not recommendations, mandates. And lo and behold, these mandates, the countries with these mandates have lower incidence of disease. It's just there. These are rough, and these are economically rough. Now, our governor is dragging his feet as long as he can, as far as he can, in a very Trumpist style. And he may start getting very active once the problem has already exploded. West Virginia is very lucky. I don't know how. I think it's luck. I don't think it's much else. We have a fairly low risk right now, and it's staying. That's per capita low risk right now. one way to keep it that way would be to follow standard public health recommendations. This would involve the governor saying everybody should be wearing a mask when you're out in public, period, end of it. Now, it's a small thing, but it's just about, from the point of view of mitigation, about all there is. There's not much else. Obviously, on a national level, this would be very important too, but that ain't gonna happen. There are a lot of people, including the president, all the way down, who just don't think masks should be a part of our program. That's like the president saying insulin's not really that important in diabetes. It just doesn't work that way. That's just not how science works. So what we could be doing, I mean, for instance, I've never quite figured out exactly why wearing a mask destroys businesses. Wearing a mask. I'm not talking about whether restaurants should be open. I'm just wearing the mask. Why is that economically harmful? It isn't. Okay? It's politically harmful because leadership, starting with the president, has not directed us to do this. So do some fairly simple, straightforward stuff, and the governor could do this. The governor could say that. Right now, the governor has been not doing this. So again, I'm just going back to the public health perspective, very, very basic stuff. Follow Fauci, follow the old version of CDC, follow the old version of FDA, follow these people who know and knew what they were saying when they made these recommendations. And look at other countries. You liked that graph I sent you for the states with COVID infection. I have another one which is just as interesting, which is a huge one on the countries.
Oh God.
and it's not only COVID infection per capita and actual cases, it's a whole bunch of other stuff. And look at the countries that are doing well and look at the countries that are doing poorly. And then look at shows, what do you call it, video clips from those countries, and they're wearing the mask. And very few in those countries, by the way, wear their mask with their nose exposed. It's an interesting point. You know, around here, people think wearing a mask with your nose exposed, you can breathe better. Sure, you can exhale the virus much more easily if you have your nose uncovered. Those countries that are doing well know how to wear a mask. They not only wear the masks, they know how to wear masks. So again, the science is there, the evidence is there. That's my public health perspective.
Scott.
Well, I think Tina was first.
I was
just
going to really quickly say, I think that our enemies understand symbolism a lot better than we do, because the masks were such a convenient visual and also visceral thing to focus the anxiety and anger on that they have been very consciously building over time, that to like say, okay, it's the masks. Like they have people, like they have psychologists and they have think tanks that like study how to message, and they grab those symbols like really well. And of course they do, because they have more money and resources than we do. So, but yeah, I think that's why their anti-mask works so well.
Right. Scott, followed by Lou.
Yeah, I want to go back to Carl's point about cooperatives, because the steelworkers have a formal relationship with Mondragon. And when they came over, I was in a couple of meetings when they came over and met with the union and et cetera, and we worked out this agreement. And one of the things that I think is really an example of this, and I wish I could remember where it was, but anyway, one of the steel mills that was completely, I think it was in Ohio, but I'm not sure about that. That was, no, it was in Pennsylvania, that was being shut down because of, you know, what was going on in the steel industry. With Mondragon, it was reopened as a workers' co-op, and all of the workers went back to work. And what they were making, and what they, as far as I know, are still making, is the blades for the windmills, the big steel blades for the windmills. And that's a growing industry, and they're selling a lot of them from what I hear, and all of those people are still on the job. So I really do think that spreading that idea I think it would be very fruitful in a lot of areas that people would be surprised. That's
Lou.
it.
Well, a quick comment on the mask thing. There was a really fascinating interview on Fresh Air a month or so ago, and I wish I could remember the woman's name who was a scholar talking about the behavior of dictators. And one of the things that she said was that they will say something that doesn't make sense or tell you to do something that doesn't make sense as a test of loyalty. And I've started to wonder, is not wearing the mask a loyalty test for
Right.
some people?
Absolutely.
That's a good.
Well,
good-
it certainly makes identification of your supporters easier.
Okay, good. One last question. And then,
John, can I jump in with one thing that
Yeah,
I
go ahead,
wanted to go way back to when you were talking about being in the labor movement and being presented with, bad or worse. And I'm guessing that was since the 1970s or 80s that was happening. Is that right?
No, that was happening in the 70s. No, that was happening in the 70s. It started 79 was a bad year, pal.
Right. But I think that if we go back to the beginning of the labor movement in mass production industries, the CIO, I think that what we see is that as people were coming out of the Depression and were seeing the United Steelworkers make gains, that was inspiring. And it was Jack Metzger's book, Striking Steel, is one of my favorite books. And one of the things he talks about, even in the 50s, he said that his dad would say, when another industry gets a pay raise, that's good for the whole community. And there was this attitude. But what I've seen since the 80s and the decline of the labor movement is people saying those auto workers shouldn't be making that much, or those transit workers should not be making that much. And I think it speaks to a culture of individualism, that we've lost this idea that we're all in this together. And I think that part of it's the laws, the free trade agreements, other things, but part of it's also this culture of rooting for other people to be doing well as part of lifting the whole community. That's something that's been lost.
Good point. And let me go one more round here, because I want to ask you about the severance tax. It's West Virginia employment in the natural resources industry is low, although until recently they were rising in gas. But it pays for a substantial section of state benefits, state budget, as well as I think there are each county, at least last time I looked, was most of the counties were receiving some money directly as a consequence, and it was built into their budgets as well. And so that the coal industry had its financial clause, in many parts of the state that, because, the question is, when you tax them and you tax them high, they now are still your source of income. What is your ability to, from a political economy standpoint, to shift to, a different balance of industrial policy, right? Away from it. And so do you own them or do they own you? It becomes a never-ending kind of dynamic. And I was wondering if the severance policy, one, be raised, or two, abolished. And if it's abolished, meaning you're going away from that industry, what do you replace it with? And how do you spend the money? The discussion today shows that given the decline of manufacturing and natural resources as a source of employment, that if the education level is not advanced, then the state will continue to decline. Because what other jobs are available there in that sector? Besides taking care of sick people, healthcare is about it for occupations that pay, you know, more than $15 an hour. So the severance tax though is a complex issue because it faces many nations who are resource rich too, and several states in the United States. It's an important question. What should our attitude toward it be?
I was just going to say, I mean, the positive of the severance tax, I mean, the negative part, I would say there's a direct correlation, and folks in PA ask me, when you have the severance tax and it brings in a lot of money, like in West Virginia, substantial amount of money, and funds schools, you get more buy-in for the industry, which I think is why fracking is more supported in West Virginia compared to Pennsylvania. So if you do look at polling in Pennsylvania, it's about 50-50, even in the middle of the state. So that's the negative of having a severance tax, that you can't make a silk purse out of a sow's ear. So I think that's the negative, but the positive is if it's managed right and effectively, I think you can do that. I think Norway obviously is the best example of that. Now they're pulling it completely away and divesting their money that's in their $1 trillion public pension fund, because they're the only country that really did it right. But I think there's a great case to make the severance tax, to use it to transition, but I think it has to be exceedingly high. And there is no downside whatsoever to making a severance tax 50, 100% if you want to. I'd say 50, 75% would be great. What is the worst that could happen? They stop drilling, they stop mining coal. Is that the worst that could happen? And what you end up getting in that, I mean, if you just look at the price of gas has dropped by 400% over the last, 10 years. Well, that means you can have a severance tax. And they kept drilling more and more and more and more during that whole price drop, which kind of is interesting in its own right. But what it tells you is there's just an enormous amount of room for a severance tax. If they can drill, trillions of cubic feet in our region at, $1.80 per MSF, yeah, they can have a severance tax. You can have a really high severance tax. And I think, but the problem is managing it. And I think most of the funds should go into a mineral trust fund like Alaska or other places, because you don't want to get government funding. Generally, best practice, you don't want government to fund general operating expenses with it, because then you run into fiscal issues down the road, like Wyoming's facing, West Virginia, other places.
All right, Patience.
I wish that it was not called a severance tax, or that it was actually split into two, that there was a severance tax and a mitigation tax. Because one of the things that we have not addressed at all is the mitigation that is needed, both for the human communities as the industries wind down, and they inevitably do, but they always leave massive externalities that the state, hopefully with federal help, but not usually, that the state has to clean up. And if we had a mitigation tax that was invested, we could use the interest in the meantime to fund some of the things that we've all been talking about. But then when it's time for the cleanup, we have some of the resources we need to undertake it.
Anybody else on the severance tax?
I think it would be, well, I don't know, it's probably not practical, but ideally the situation is to, state ownership of all the land in West Virginia and the minerals underneath it. The interesting question is how did it become private property in the first place? Which is something I study some in the slide things I posted to the chat box.
The mineral rights.
It wasn't always private property, but it became private property.
That's true. That is true. Well, why don't we let Dr. Martin have the last word here today? We're at our witching hour. We go more than an hour, and people stop listening on Facebook. So,
well, I was just going to say quickly that I think that even if you go back to the 1950s when they first proposed this severance tax, that there was this attitude like this industry's a fragile thing, and we have to do just the right thing to make sure it stays here forever. But if you viewed these industries as having a lifespan that's going to come to an end, I think a lot more people would be in favor of saying we better get what is owed to the people while we can before this goes away. I think that's true with natural gas as well. And it was true of the steel industry in my home county. And I think that the more we started to realize that that capital is going to go where it wants to go, and we have to think about these things being temporary, not forever. The people who built the towns in my home county, they thought the steel industry would be there forever, and were totally unprepared when it left. So I think we need to be a little bit more mindful of the lifespan of these things.
Right on.
All right, I think we can close it off there, and I want to thank everybody today for participating. Good discussion. We're going to continue this in a number of dimensions, and I want to thank Ted for asking Lou, and thank Lou for coming on the show and talking us through this. And
Thank you, Lou.
everybody's fine contribution as usual. I wish Randy well on his visit to the dentist. I got one coming up. I'm not looking forward to.
I'm a post dentist guy. I don't have to worry anymore.
Right. And I hope Mike feels better next week. Okay, too. Thank you guys for hanging in there, and we'll see you soon.
Thanks,
Nice meeting
everyone.
everyone.
Bye, everybody.
Bye-bye.